Bleak Faith is a game comparable in many aspects to the much-praised catalog of From Software titles such as Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and most recently Elden Ring. Lately, we've seen an explosion in this genre called Soulslikes, where gamers have been able to experience other developers' takes on this now classic style many gamers love, myself included. I just beat Bleak Faith, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in this video, but I need to make it clear from the start that this is not a good game, and it's not worth your money. But I also want to share a few things that strangely surprised and surpassed my expectations of what Bleak Faith has to offer. Yeah, there is some good in this deservedly badly reviewed game. Let's go ahead and get into it. To frame things off, we have to talk about the obvious influence that Bleak Faith draws from, the Dark Souls series. In my estimation, I think this game is mostly influenced by Dark Souls 1. To be brutally honest from the get-go, this game is nowhere near the quality of even the worst of the Souls games. It falls apart in almost every aspect, with the exception of one singular concept. The one single thing that Bleak Faith does right is its masterpiece of a world. If you listen to a lot of gaming reviews like I do, critics that adore Dark Souls 1 will tell you the best thing about that game is how interconnected the world of Lordran is. If you haven't played Dark Souls 1, in the first 2 acts of the game, there's an area called the Firelink Shrine. It's the main hub area where you level up and return back to throughout your game. As you explore away from the hub area, you'll find many tunnels, pathways, elevators, and ladders that all wind back to the original bonfire checkpoint. What's impressive about this is how it always manages to catch you off guard when that familiar Firelink Shrine theme starts playing in the background, and you realize you've traversed back to where you actually started. In my mind, this is the gold standard of thoughtful and intricate world design, and it's certainly influenced many action and exploration games to this day. Another similar example is in Resident Evil 2, where you start off in the main police station, Front Hall, and as you progress through the game, you'll find the key to a door, or you open someone's desk and you unlock another entrance to a safe room, etc. Interestingly enough, the joy comes less from venturing out into new, unfamiliar areas, and more by carving out new paths back to your safety. Both of these games successfully orient their map exploration like solving a large-scale puzzle. It's a unique approach to world design that not a lot of video games attempt to do, almost certainly because it requires an enormous amount of foresight and careful planning way before map geometry is even created. Even in From Software's most recent foray into their own genre of Soulslikes, with Elden Ring, they did not achieve the same level of world connectedness that they did in Dark Souls 1. I already know it's unpopular to say anything negative about Elden Ring, so try to bear with my agonizing opinion that I like DS1's world more than ER's because of how interconnected its design is. It is apparent that this aspect of a connected vertical world is no longer a priority for From Software, which is fine. They can focus on what they want to and other new things, but this is exactly the one single place Bleak Faith carves out its identity, and the only reason it kept me interested throughout the playtime. Well, for the most part. So this game attempts to replicate or imitate that same unique level design of Dark Souls 1, and I will argue that in at least the first half of the game, it does accomplish this one concept of world interconnectedness impressively, astoundingly even, but heavy disclaimer here. Just because I'm going to praise this one thing about the game doesn't mean it's worth your time or your money. I want to be clear to all the Dark Souls fanboys like myself, the themes of Bleak Faith, the combat of Bleak Faith, the lore of Bleak Faith, the soundtrack of Bleak Faith, or almost anything else I can think of are all abysmal in comparison to gaming standards. So don't waste your time with it. Got it? Okay, back to the spicy thoughts. In Bleak Faith, I traversed a lengthy subterranean tunnel beneath the map, anticipating a typical linear path to a new region, but it actually circled me back to the main hub area. This rerouting pattern repeated itself several other times, with new pathways utilizing various modes of motion, such as stairs, tunnels, and ladders, all eventually leading back to the main hub area. While I acknowledge that some people criticize this approach for feeling like it's a bad thing to get rerouted back to areas they've already visited, I simply don't feel the same. For me, there's a sense of awe knowing that I've just revealed a handy pathway previously unknown to me, but it was there from the start of the game. I find it remarkable. I'd say it's brilliant and even genius in some instances, traversing the beautifully dystopian landscape and finding new routes back to the safety of the hub. It shows care, and I appreciate that. But this design choice is not without flaw. The world has a grand scale and is awesomely vertical in its mapping. This is where the problem lies though, because in order to maintain its devotion to interconnectedness, there are extremely long and tedious ladders, elevators, and other routes that connect the levels together. There are multiple ladders that take more than 90 seconds to climb. There are multiple elevators that take well over 2 minutes to ride up and down all the way. And I'm pretty sure there's one elevator that takes like 3 or 4 minutes to fully ride from top to bottom. That is absurd. There's no reason to not have a slide down the ladder button. There's no reason after 1 minute that I should still be waiting on an elevator ride. They don't even have elevator music. Just program the elevator to move faster. My guess is that on some elevators, this long wait time is necessary to load in new levels or new geometry, but I am sure that most of the elevators' wait times could be mitigated at least a little bit just by making the elevators move quicker up and down. So, while I admire this pure devotion to interconnectedness, even to the point where it makes the travel time very obtuse and frankly boring, I think it could have been done much better overall. One final note about the interconnectedness here is that some occasional points you'll discover secret paths leading to late game areas that were actually completely available from the start of the game. In my first playthrough, I wasn't able to spot these secret ladders and was greatly surprised when I found a connection to a late game area simply behind a pipe I didn't think to look behind. And it's things like these that I certainly think are praiseworthy, because they add a layer of depth to the game that many other titles simply don't put the effort into incorporating. All in all, I really like the world connections that Bleak Faith offers. Now, on that positivity rant, I think it's also a fair time to talk about the sheer size of the world. Well, it's no Elden Ring by any means, don't get me wrong, but still, the size of this game genuinely shook me. A comparable Souls-like game you may have heard of is a game called Mortal Shell that came out back in 2020. Their world is a pretty solid 10 to 15 hours to uncover all the areas and hidden secrets, and I was honestly fine with it, considering it wasn't a fully priced game. The size of that world was good enough to keep me happy. Bleak Faith, on the other hand, is ridiculously large. I have probably put in a solid 20 hours, and I don't think I've even explored everything or seen all the areas. It's worth saying right about now that the game is also devastatingly beautiful in some places. My favorite level visually is called the Machinarium. When I first walked into it, it really took my breath away. The name Machinarium is deceiving because you would imagine maybe a factory with a bunch of robots or something, but actually, this area has a beautiful overgrown wooded feel to it. There's wide open grassy fields, trees, flowers, and decrepitated structures from long ago. It has a striking color scheme that actually reminded me of Dark Souls 3's Ringed City, and I was very happy with that. While the entire game doesn't have a superb consistency of great visuals, I'd say that more than half the areas are very beautifully done. This, on top of the fact that all the levels are nicely interconnected with each other, reinforces the facts that this game's world, at times, is genius. It is definitely not without sin, however. Remember how I said this game is huge? Well, unfortunately, it's profoundly empty as well. You see, Bleak Faith is massive, but it doesn't incentivize you to explore its vast maps, because it's all just empty space. The interesting architecture and structural design of different buildings and ruins make me want to keep exploring them, but 8 times out of 10, you're probably wasting your time because there's nothing inside them. There's so much empty space in this game, and it's honestly a shame that the devs couldn't figure out something more interesting to do with it. So on one hand, I respect how vast the world is, but when I realistically think about it from a buyer's point of view, I'd be very disappointed with the lack of interaction available from the world. I'd guesstimate that 150% of production power went into creating this interesting, interconnected place, but only like 25 or 30% went into filling it with things to do. For example, in one of the game's levels called Uranopolis, all around you, you see massive crumbling skyscrapers and concrete ruins of an old city. It's intriguing that these horizon-filling yet abandoned offices still exist, and this made me want to climb inside them and see what happened. But nope, don't do it, because they're all just empty assets without a trace of world explanation. You would think there's at least a cool item or something, But no, 85% of the time it's just empty spaces with nothing to collect. This was such wasted potential in my eyes, and a large disappointment. Unfortunately, this is just the start of the many blunders Bleak Faith throws in your face. You see, Bleak Faith is a package of about 7 or 8 things. We've already talked about the one good thing Bleak Faith has, but now it's time to address the 7 more horrendous things. First off, the UI of the game is a sore to sighted eyes. See what I did there? I thought, hey, this is a cool looking Soulslike, so I plugged in my Xbox controller to my PC and started the game like you do. But to my anguish, I found out that using a controller in this game is like eating soup off of a paper plate. All the actions in the game aren't mapped on all the controller buttons. The controls that are mapped are just confusing and unintuitive. I tried to be stubborn and thought that there was something I was just missing. But once I gave up and swapped to mouse and keyboard, it became quite clear this game was not built with controllers in mind. Controller mapping must have been a last-minute decision because there's no way somebody playtested this without using a keyboard. There is an option to reset different controls to different buttons, which is surprising. But even with remapping, you still can't play the game with a controller due to how many buttons you just need to have at your disposal to play the game. In a lot of indie games cases, I wouldn't take such offense to this. But I think because this is a Souls-like, which are nearly always played on the controller, I just got so frustrated. There shouldn't even be an option for gamepad in the menus, because that implies a successful port. It is misleading, which is needless to say, not good. The menu system and inventory loot catalog is unpolished and downright disruptive in some cases. You see, in the game, there are rings, cloaks, and amulets, which are items that give your character some sort of magical ability depending on the one that you choose. In my base version of the game, all 3 of these items are thrown into the same catalog in my inventory with no differentiation besides their titles. The cloaks obviously stand out, but let me ask you, what's the difference between a ring and an amulet? I have no clue based on their pictures. This means that I just had to manually check every individual item description to see which one was which. Because of this, I probably spent 4 to 5 times the amount of time just reading in the menus rather than actually playing the game. Oh yeah, another similar problem, I just straight up could not equip any shields for some reason the entire game. I would click on it, press equip, and then literally nothing would happen. It's frustrating that the mechanic obviously didn't work, but what's more frustrating is that the game never tells you why. I expect in time as the game gets updated that these kinks will be ironed out, but I am just conveying to you the state of my own release day experience. As you continue to traverse through the game, you'll find a lot of items that you pick up and they will fill your inventory. There's no equip load, thank heavens, but what's baffling is as you get more things, the game does not signal to you that you have to scroll downwards in your inventory to see all of your items. This was causing me to lose my mind on my first playthrough because I thought that old items were getting deleted out of my inventory. Finally, at the end of my journey, I actually realized there's a barely noticeable white scroll bar in the top left of your screen, which is so bizarre to me. Why is it on the left side? Maybe I'm the one at fault here, but my whole life, I've seen the scroll bar on the right side. Even if that was my bad throughout the whole game, I experienced another bug that didn't allow me to equip more than 1 potion type in my access slot. You see, there's 3 main healing potions at your disposal in Bleak Faith, but due to this obnoxious glitch, I was only able to use 1 of them in my engagements with any enemies. The effect of this is infuriating when an enemy hits you for most of your health bar and you have to use the limited resource and you're not able to access the other healing potion. This wouldn't be a problem if you could freely access your inventory at any time. But unfortunately, if the game senses any enemies near you, including entirety of boss fights, you cannot open your inventory to get more healing. This is absolutely unforgivable because for most of the game, you're only limited to a stack of 3 potions. Since I brought up bosses, let's go down that rabbit hole. The boss fights seem to be the primary focus of Bleak Faith in terms of progression. You kill a boss and you're able to further upgrade your gear and so on and so forth. In the game, there's 9 main bosses, including the 1 secret optional boss. Of these 9 fights, there's not a single one that I was impressed by. You might look at the designs of these bosses and think to yourself, oh, it looks alright, their designs are cool. But don't judge a book by its cover. No amount of artistic style can fix how unfun these 9 encounters turn out being. With the exception of maybe the flying metal bird boss, all of these fights have so many issues. Whether it's buggy AI, flipping through arenas, undodgeable attacks, AoEs, or bad boss music, there's always something to be pissed about, as they will inevitably kill you. To single out one boss fight in particular, for the sake of time, because we could honestly spend all day calling out all the bosses in this game, but there's one that made me quit the game because of how bad my experience was. Arch Inquisitor Belisarius is his name, and Suffer and Torture is his game. You see, in my time, I've been known to have some controversial opinions about Souls bosses, and lately Elden Ring bosses. But after experiencing the Arch Inquisitor, I never want to criticize From Software ever again on their boss fights, because I didn't know how low the bar could actually be. He's that bad. In this particular boss arena, there's 4 stationary summoning statues that are basically invulnerable. They are stationed in the 4 corners of the playing field, so you can never keep all of them effectively in your view. Their job is to spawn magic projectiles of various forms to damage you. One of them does a ground slam attack that sends a shockwave through the whole arena. One of them summons a damaging zone beneath your feet every few seconds, which causes you to constantly be running. The third one creates an always growing damage aura, which after 6 or 7 minutes swallows the entire arena. And the final, most annoying summoner is called Storm of Judgment. This dude summons a rotating bullet hell projectile spam attack that sprays across the entire arena. This move seems to be the dev's favorite, because it activates every 3 to 4 seconds. I hope you like dodging things that are not on the screen, because that's exactly what these 4 invulnerable mobs do. On top of this, your actual goal is to deal damage to the main Arch Inquisitor, but after he takes a few hits, he actually summons another clone of himself and is constantly aggroed on you. I need to collect my cool. This is just so freaking bad. Hold on. Up to this point in the game, I faced so much BS and buggy glitches and horrible fights, but I was still determined to finish it for some reason. I was 3 or 4 hours into fighting Arch Inquisitor and barely scraping his health bar away with my maxed out gear and dying over and over again, but my stubborn motivation just ran dry at this point. It's completely fair to say that if I wasn't making this video, I would have never tried to finish Arch Inquisitor brokenness here ever again. Honestly, I was done, but I did it for the sake of this long critique. So if you like it, I'd appreciate you letting me know. Maybe I'll make some more. Anyways, this bitterness against these bosses is coming from someone who enjoyed a Millennia, no magic, no Bloodhound step, melee only grind, by the way. I appreciate a fair challenge, but I realized at this point I wanted to quit because I was dying because of the developer's faults, not my own. I eventually was able to beat him, only because of one extremely broken bow item that essentially summons in 7 aimbot arrows and shoots them all at the boss. Rinse and repeat this 25 times while constantly dodging his spells and waiting out the 20-second spell cooldown on my bow, and yeah, I beat him. Even so, my victory felt extremely unrewarding, like it was all a waste of my time. You could take that exact same sentiment for Belarius and apply it to any of the other boss fights in this game, and it would still be true, depending on whether or not you have a broken item that trivializes fights. Why have any variety of weapons at all if the players are forced to use a select 1 or 2 broken weapons to compete with any of your endgame enemies? So much more could be said about the buggy or glitched out attack animations of bosses, or the many AoE health draining effects in this game, but I honestly think I'll leave those stones unturned just so we can move on to the also frustrating character movement. You've probably been able to tell from watching some of my gameplay that the character handling is sluggish and zippy at the same time. I think both these things shouldn't be possible, but Bleak Faith manages to pull it off in the most unsatisfying way possible. The sluggish side comes as a result of my dude's relationship with the frictionless ground. As soon as I started playing the game, I noticed that my character was sliding instead of walking. It felt like instead of a gritty, sturdy ground beneath me, I was actually walking on a slate of ice. This meant that the smallest cracks of the ground would send my avatar flying off the edges of the many sheer drops. And every single one of those falls, guess what, results in an instant death and resets you back to your last checkpoint. This being my very first experience with Bleak Faith, in combination of not being able to use a controller, actually correctly set the stage for my rest of time with the game. Moving in this game feels like your character has momentum cranked up to 300% at all times. I don't understand why or how this is. Probably to make some of the platforming sections possible, I'm not sure. But what I am sure of is the 300% inertia effect does not combo well with enemy engagements. One of the first mobs I found was a red-plated robot that chased me down and leapt towards me. Then a bright white light flashed before me, and I could see my character flying off the map to my unavoidable death. This was one of my first combat experiences. The radius on the red robot's explosion is very large, and you have the pleasure of dealing with him for a good portion of the first act when you're still getting calibrated to this game. The effect this mob has on your body reinforces my theory that momentum is turned up by 10 notches in Bleak Faith, and I don't know if this is even intentional. You see, another bug I encountered was some sort of issue with how the game's frame rate greatly affected my avatar's movement. If you set the game to a lower capped frame rate of, let's say, 60 FPS, your character will move very slowly. But if you set it up to your monitor's potential of, let's say, 144 Hz, your character will zip around like a mosquito in a windstorm. Seeing my heavily armored character weightlessly whiz back and forth really is something that breaks the immersion for me. I don't know about you. So, considering that all these small things aggregate together into a larger, messy slop, it's not hard to see why I feel exhausted and annoyed by this substandard movement. How does the player movement affect the combat, you ask? Well, I brought it up, so let's address the combat. I wanted that classic Souls-like back and forth swinging, that crisp roll around them and swipe at their butts type gameplay. Well, Bleak Faith doesn't have it. Your combat style is based on what type of weapon you choose, much like the rest of the Souls games. If you want a heavy attack, pick the big sword. If you want to do range damage, pick the Technomancer's staff. You obtain items by fighting them in the open world or by defeating a foe and pick up the weapon that he had. There's actually a surprising amount of variety of weaponry at your disposal. In my playthrough, I picked up the weapon dropped by the first boss, which was essentially a colossal great sword with a unique boss weapon ability. That was cool. I could jump into the air and slam back down, creating a damaging shockwave on cooldown. In a weird way, this is like an unintentional RPG, where you must have certain items to defeat bosses. I say unintentional because it seems like there's a variety of weapons and perks to choose from, but the sad reality is that the late game enemies and bosses are so broken that I literally cannot imagine them being beaten in any other way besides using one very specific bow. It seems unintentional because of all the variety of options you have to choose from. And to tell you the truth, it's just bad design. But if I squint my eyes hard enough and look at Bleak Faith as though it's a game like Legend of Zelda, where you literally have to use the boomerang to defeat a certain boss, I could see it maybe working in a different title, but not this one. Once again, I don't recommend this game at all. The combat honestly makes Dark Souls 2 feel like Sekiro in relativity. I know I'm bashing on DS2, but I actually have a point to make here. You know how a lot of people don't like that game because it's so-called artificial difficulty because there's too many enemies on the screen at one time? Bleak Faith took that to heart and said, we can do worse. I noticed this especially in the very first and last areas of the game. As you push into a zone, oftentimes 3 to 6 enemies get triggered and start crowding in on you. And guess what? This isn't some Batman Arkham Asylum type game where you can fistfight 24 Gotham baddies at once. No, this game is you slamming your big fat sword into the ground and waiting for your stamina bar to fill back up before you can strike again, one by one. This isn't freaking Diablo, where you walk into a dungeon and incinerate all the mobs with holy fire. This is you can lock on to one person at a time type game. If you're so keen on having me face 5 enemies at once, you need to make a combat system where I can engage with that. In practicality, there's really only 2 ways you're able to deal with the crowds in this game. Option 1 is to fight 6 people at once and guess what? Die when they all do the exact same staggered move. Or option 2 is to just run past them. Let's talk about the types of foes you'll see. There's a variety of mob types that are mostly confined in each new zone. A lot of enemies are grunt level fodder to keep you occupied, but there are giants and other mini-bosses that do a decent job at breaking up the monotony. Perhaps you've already spotted this in the footage. The mobs almost never fit in with their respective areas visually, at least in my opinion. This actually reminded me of how some games will let you see like your own self-made character in a cutscene, and he has like a purple head and is wearing the Jester armor set for some reason. Well, a lot of the mobs in this game made me feel that same sort of comical disconnect when seeing them out in the world for the first time. The biggest example of this is after I unlocked the main hub area. All around me, I see this cool setting of a rundown, rainy city center. But then I turn the corner and see Leaping Larry over here, equipped with a harvesting scythe. Yeah, that just didn't really jive with what I thought to have found in this cityscape. Sometimes the mobs are a hit and fit right in with their surroundings. The ocean zone, called the Deluge, for example, actually has dudes wearing diving suits, and they have fishing spears as weapons. That's an example of an enemy type done right. And I wish the storytelling using this setting was more incorporated into the game. You see, the devs obviously put a ton of thought into the geographical placements of levels and how they are connected. Why would you not put more thought into the types of enemies one would expect to inhabit your awesome map? For the most part, the creatures you'll be fighting have what I call balloon animal animations. It's hard to explain exactly without seeing it, but they move like they're in chest-deep water, but they're also really quick at the same time. Their floaty feeling looks cheap, which is again reinforced by how many enemies get stuck in the map, or just completely clip through the walls altogether. Something like that is admittedly kind of funny at first, but when you're just trying to finish the game, it honestly becomes frustrating seeing it so many times, because you're not sure if you need to worry about an enemy glitching through the wall next to you, because maybe he's going to one-shot you and set you back 15 minutes. I know a lot of games do have bugs, and it's understandable, and they eventually get fixed, and I hope Bleak Faith does that as well. Glitches are pretty much just the nature of the industry sometimes with gaming, but in this game, they are so baked in and so constant that I honestly have a tough time imagining this game without them. Time will tell, I guess. On the topic of mobs, it's time we have to rant about certain red knights that if you've played this game for some reason, you'll know exactly what I'm about to say. Let me paint the picture of how much suffering they cause. These red knights seem to spawn into the game after you've defeated 3 main bosses. I'm not sure what the lore reason is, but they will invade your world and start roaming around old areas you've already beaten, as well as the new areas you haven't yet conquered. These tomato-looking demons are essentially the Black Knights from Dark Souls 1. If they had 500% the health and 300% the damage output, they will chase you and they will one-shot you. Only at the very end of the game did my character have good enough armor and health to tank 2 whole hits from them, which is ridiculous. Why not just kill them, you ask? Don't you have a comically large sword strapped to your back? Well, check out my sick damage output on these guys. These red knights are so overtuned and are just balls to fight due to their insane stats. And most of them will actually guard the tunnels back to specific checkpoints just because they know you're going to have to use them to extract out of that zone. I know Mortal Shell had this same sort of system where you defeat the boss and have to return its soul back to the drop zone without dying. And I actually think this was a fun idea that turns the usual gameplay on its head. It gets you to plan out your route and put some forethought into how aggressive you want to be attacking versus defending. Bleak Faith once again does this fun formula wrong by making it impossible to interact with the checkpoint if there's any enemies nearby. Yes, that includes the 10,000 HP tomato knights that will one-shot you. It's just dumb and forces you to resort to the cheapest tactics possible to get them out of your way. I had to lure one up an elevator shaft, which was kind of fun in the moment, but at that point, aren't you just avoiding the game instead of playing it? All in all, unless you get lucky with some glitches or bugs, after beating a really tough boss fight, you have to go through the torture of fighting all the mobs in the level over again in order to safely return to the hub. It's annoying. These are just a couple of the reasons Bleak Faith's combat and enemies were abysmal to me. Really abysmal. There are pairing mechanics and rolling mechanics maybe you can use. There might even be more gameplay mechanics that I don't even know about, because like I've said, the game doesn't really even teach you what you have to work with. It's annoying because the game will fill your screen with a pop-up tutorial like in the middle of fighting, that's meant to teach you a mechanic, like weapon chaining attacks. But the problem is that you only see these text tutorials one single time. If you close them at first like I did, because I was in the middle of combat, you can't find them ever again in the menus. Nowhere are you able to access these decently important mechanic tutorials. Maybe there was one that taught me how to equip a freaking shield in the game, and I just didn't see it. Overall, the combat is pretty much atrocious. And I don't know, I'm just kind of over it at this point. Like the title of my video says, I really think this game could have been the first Souls-like masterpiece not created by From Software. I know I spent a lot of time highlighting the bad, and that's because there's a lot of it. But I know that there is some genius here. I honestly could imagine an exploration-focused sequel. If it were up to me, I'd scrap all the focus on combat and weapons, and instead propose a tool collection system that would enhance the ways a player could explore your amazing world. Maybe this means finding a grapple hook after traversing a mountainous area. Maybe this means getting a pair of boots that allows the walking down to the ocean floor to find a sick water temple, and so on. This would capitalize so much more effectively on my burning desire to explore all the vast world in front of me, instead of forcing that god-awful combat system down my throat. I think the game could go from a failed attempt at a combat RPG to a shining example of a great exploration-type game. And I know this game was made by 3 people, and I didn't talk about that much in the review. But for me, knowing that there was a small dev team doesn't make the game more or less fun to play. At the end of the day, I'm just being real. I can't imagine how hard it is to make a game like this. But from my perspective, Bleak Faith bit off more than it could chew. It felt like there was so much more this game wanted to do, but unfortunately for us, we got the bad ending. The bright side is that I'm actually hopeful for the future of the series. I know I've talked a lot of crap, but I really think there is genius in this game, and I hope to see more of it in a different project altogether. Thank you so much for sticking with the video this long. I hope you got some entertainment out of listening. Did you play Bleak Faith? You know, I've spent a while pondering this game, and to hear somebody else's thoughts in the comments would be awesome. I look forward to seeing them and responding to them. Subscribe if you'd like to be notified for the channel's next big critique. But for now, take care and see you next time.